The council chamber was the largest room Katie Morgan had ever seen. It stretched upward for hundreds of meters, and floating platforms held representatives from 47 different alien species. Lights of every color drifted through the air, and the walls showed images of distant galaxies. This was Nexus Prime, the heart of galactic civilization, and Katie felt very small, standing at its center. She was the human ambassador, and she had come to beg. Katie wore her best diplomatic uniform, dark blue with silver buttons. Her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast. She had practiced her speech 100 times on the journey here. She knew every word by memory. But looking up at the alien faces staring down at her, she wondered if any of it would matter. The year was 2347, and Earth had been part of the Galactic Concord for 62 years. In all that time, humans had never been treated as equals. They were the newcomers, the primitives, the species that had only recently learned to travel between stars. The Council tolerated them, but nothing more. High Chancellor Vorath sat on the highest platform. He was Kelthari, an insectoid being with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like black mirrors. His species had ruled the Council for 3,000 years. When he looked at Katie, she saw no warmth in his gaze. She saw nothing at all. Katie took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them about Arden IV, a human colony on a small world near the edge of explored space. 3 months ago, a plague had appeared. It spread fast and killed faster. Children died in their mother's arms. Fathers watched their families fade away. The colony's doctors worked without sleep, but they could not stop it. 17,000 people had already died, and more were dying every day. Earth did not have the medical technology to create a cure. But the Council did. The Kelthari had medicines that could heal almost any disease. The Vorlani had machines that could rebuild damaged cells. Any of these species could save the people of Arden IV with technology they considered basic. Katie's voice was clear and strong as she made her request. She asked for medical aid. She asked for doctors and supplies. She promised that Earth would pay any price, agree to any terms. All she wanted was for the dying to stop. When she finished speaking, the chamber was silent. Then High Chancellor Vorath made a sound that Katie did not understand at first. It was a clicking noise, rapid and sharp. After a moment, she realized he was laughing. Other delegates joined in. The Vorlani representative, a tall being with gray skin and 3 eyes, pointed at Katie and spoke in a mocking tone. The translation device in her ear converted his words. He called humans useful vermin. He said they bred quickly enough that losing a few thousand should not matter. The Sindari delegate, a creature that looked like a mass of flowing tentacles, suggested that Earth simply make more workers to replace the dead ones. His voice held no cruelty, only casual dismissal, as if he were discussing broken machinery rather than human lives. Katie stood frozen as the laughter washed over her. She had expected resistance. She had expected difficult negotiations and harsh terms. She had not expected this. They were not refusing her request because they could not help. They were refusing because they did not care. Human lives meant nothing to them. High Chancellor Vorath raised one of his 4 arms, and the chamber fell silent. He spoke in a formal tone, explaining that the Council would now vote on the human request. Katie felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps not all of them were so cruel. Perhaps some would vote in her favor. The vote was unanimous. All 47 species voted no. Vorath explained the decision. Article 7 of the Concord Charter restricted advanced medical technology to species that had achieved cultural maturity. Earth had not met this standard. The Council could not make exceptions, or every primitive species would come begging for help they had not earned. Katie wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that children were dying, that families were being torn apart, that cultural maturity meant nothing to a mother holding her dead child. But she was a diplomat, and diplomats did not scream. She bowed her head and thanked the Council for their time. Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did not water. She walked out of that chamber, with her back straight, and her face empty. Lieutenant Ryan Cole was waiting for her on the diplomatic vessel Meridian. He was young, only 26, with short brown hair and serious eyes. He had watched the entire session on the ship's screens. When Katie stepped through the airlock, he saw something in her face that frightened him. She walked past him without a word and went to the communication room. Ryan followed, but kept his distance. He had served with Katie for 3 years and had never seen her like this. There was no anger on her face. There was no sadness. There was nothing at all. And that emptiness was more terrifying than rage. Katie opened a secure channel to Earth. The face of Secretary General Derek Palmer appeared on the screen. He was an older man, with gray hair, and the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much. Before entering politics, he had been a soldier. He had fought in the Mars Uprising and the Belt Wars. He understood violence in ways that most politicians did not. Katie spoke 6 words. Her voice was flat and cold. She said, "They laughed at our dying children." Derek Palmer did not respond immediately. He sat very still, and something changed in his eyes. The politician faded away, and the soldier emerged. He asked Katie to confirm what she had said, and she did. Derek closed the channel and sat alone in his office for a long time. Outside his window, the lights of the United Earth Capitol glittered in the night. Billions of people lived on this world, and billions more lived on colonies throughout human space. They had trusted their leaders to protect them. They had believed that joining the Galactic Concord would bring peace and prosperity. Instead, their children were dying while aliens laughed. Derek picked up a secure communicator and contacted Admiral Scott Brennan at Fleet Command. The Admiral was an old friend, one of the few people who knew certain secrets about humanity's true capabilities. When the Admiral answered, Derek spoke in a quiet voice. He said to activate Protocol Prometheus. All of it. There was a pause. The Admiral asked if Derek was certain. This would change everything. There would be no going back. Derek thought about the children on Arden IV. He thought about Katie standing alone in that chamber, while aliens mocked human suffering. He thought about 62 years of humiliation and contempt. He said he was certain. Across human space, encrypted messages began to spread through hidden networks. Ships that officially did not exist received orders. Soldiers who had trained in secret for decades prepared for deployment. Scientists in facilities that appeared on no map made final checks on weapons that the galaxy believed impossible. And on Nexus Prime, the council members returned to their comfortable lives, confident that the human problem had been handled. They had put the primitives in their place once again. They did not know that their galaxy had just changed forever. They would learn soon enough. The surface of Europa was a frozen wasteland. Ice stretched in every direction, broken only by ridges and cracks that had formed over millions of years. No one lived here. No one would want to. The radiation from Jupiter was deadly, and the temperature never rose above -100 degrees. At least, that was what the galaxy believed. Admiral Scott Brennan stood in an elevator that descended deep beneath the ice. The ride took almost 10 minutes. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into a world that should not have existed. The underground facility was massive. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, carved out of the rock beneath Europa's frozen shell. Bright lights, illuminated hangars, filled with ships, thousands of workers moved between machines and control stations. The air hummed with the sound of technology more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. This was Project Blackout, and it had been humanity's greatest secret for 60 years. Dr. Laura Kim met the Admiral at the entrance to the main hangar. She was a small woman, with gray hair and sharp eyes behind thick glasses. She had spent her entire adult life in this facility, working on projects that the rest of humanity knew nothing about. When she shook the Admiral's hand, her grip was surprisingly strong. She asked if it was time, and the Admiral nodded. Laura closed her eyes for a moment. She had always known this day would come. Part of her had hoped it never would. They walked together through the hangar, and Admiral Brennan looked at the ships lined up in neat rows. There were 300 of them, each one a masterpiece of engineering. Their hulls were smooth and black, made from materials that Council scientists believed could not exist. Their engines could bend space in ways that violated everything the galaxy understood about physics. Laura explained the technology as they walked. 60 years ago, when Earth first made contact with alien civilizations, humans had been excited and hopeful. They had dreamed of joining a peaceful galactic community and learning from older, wiser species. Instead, they had found the Galactic Concord. The Council did not welcome newcomers. They tolerated them at best and exploited them at worst. Earth was given the lowest tier of membership, forbidden from accessing advanced technology, and treated like a useful pet rather than an equal partner. Human diplomats smiled and accepted these terms, while human scientists began their real work. Every piece of alien technology that humans could acquire was brought to Europa. Crashed ships, stolen samples, traded artifacts. All of it ended up here. Teams of engineers and physicists worked day and night to understand how these things functioned. They did not just copy what they found. They improved it. Laura stopped in front of one of the ships and placed her hand on its hull. She said this vessel could travel faster than any ship in the known galaxy. Its weapons could crack planetary shields that had stood for centuries. Its armor could survive weapons that would vaporize a Council battleship. And its stealth systems made it completely invisible to every sensor the aliens had ever developed. Admiral Brennan asked how this was possible. The Council species had thousands of years of technological development. How had humans caught up in only 6 decades? Laura smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression. She said humans were not smarter than other species, but they were more desperate. They knew from the beginning that they were surrounded by civilizations that saw them as inferior. That fear had driven them to work harder, think faster, and push further than anyone else. And there was something else. The Council species had stopped innovating long ago. They had reached a level of technology they considered sufficient and stopped trying to advance. Why bother developing new weapons when no one could challenge them? Why bother improving their ships when they already controlled the galaxy? They had become comfortable, and comfortable species did not grow. Humans had never been comfortable. They had always been hungry, always been reaching for more. That hunger was their greatest advantage. Commander Kevin Torres joined them near the tactical center. He was a tall man, with dark hair, and the calm demeanor of someone who had spent years planning for war. His job was to coordinate the attack that everyone knew was coming. He had studied Council military doctrine for decades. He knew their weaknesses better than they knew themselves. Kevin explained the situation. The Council military was large but slow. Their ships were powerful but predictable. They had not fought a real war in over 1,000 years, and their tactics were outdated. They relied on overwhelming force rather than clever strategy. Humans would not give them the chance to use that force. The attack would be fast, coordinated, and precise. Before the Council understood what was happening, their most important military assets would be destroyed. Meanwhile, on Arden IV, the plague continued its terrible work. Dr. Amy Patterson had not slept in 3 days. She moved through the colony's hospital, checking on patients and adjusting treatments that she knew would not work. The medicine they had was not strong enough. The equipment they had was not advanced enough. All she could do was make people comfortable while they died. A young boy named Marcus lay in one of the beds. He was only 8 years old, and the plague had taken most of his strength. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand and whispering words that Amy could not hear. The woman's eyes were empty. She had already lost her husband and her daughter. Marcus was all she had left. Amy stepped outside the hospital and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, help existed. Somewhere out there, aliens had medicine that could cure this plague in hours. They had chosen not to share it. They had chosen to let children die because humans had not earned the right to live. A message arrived on her secure communicator. It was from human intelligence, confirming what she had suspected for weeks. The plague was not natural. Analysis of the genetic markers showed that it had been engineered by the Sindari. They wanted the mineral deposits on Arden IV, and they had decided that killing the colonists was easier than negotiating with them. Amy felt something cold settle in her chest. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was rage. Pure and simple. The kind of rage that burned away everything else. She sent the information to Earth and went back inside to care for her patients. There was nothing else she could do. But she knew that somewhere, someone would make the Sindari pay. Back on Europa, Secretary General Derek Palmer appeared on the main screen of the tactical center. His face was calm, but his eyes held a fire that Admiral Brennan recognized. It was the look of a man who had made a decision and would not turn back. Derek addressed everyone in the facility. He spoke about the founding of human civilization, about the struggles and triumphs that had brought them to the stars. He spoke about the hope they had felt when they discovered they were not alone in the universe, and the disappointment they had experienced when they learned what the galaxy was really like. For 60 years, humanity had played by the rules. They had accepted their low position. They had smiled at insults and ignored humiliation. They had done everything the Council asked of them, hoping that one day they would be accepted as equals. That day had never come. Derek said that tonight, everything would change. Every treaty that had kept humanity suppressed would be broken. Every secret weapon would be unleashed. Every lie would be exposed. There would be consequences. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. He paused and looked directly at the screen, as if he could see every person watching him. He said, "They made us kneel for 60 years. Tonight, we stand." The facility erupted in cheers. Soldiers embraced each other. Scientists wept with a mixture of fear and pride. Commander Kevin Torres began issuing final orders. Admiral Brennan watched the preparations with a heavy heart. He knew that thousands would die in the coming hours. He knew that humanity was about to start a war that would reshape the galaxy. But he also knew that some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth dying for. And the right to be treated as equals. The right to have their children live. The right to exist without the permission of those who despised them. That was worth everything. The fleet began to power up. 300 ships that should not have existed prepared to launch. And across the galaxy, the Council continued their comfortable lives, unaware that their world was about to end. At exactly midnight Earth Standard Time, the galaxy changed forever. The Kelthari home system was supposed to be the most secure location in known space. 12 defense platforms orbited the planet, each one armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. A network of sensors covered every approach route, capable of detecting ships from light years away. 300 warships patrolled the system at all times, ready to respond to any threat. None of it mattered. 40 human ships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the Kelthari capital world. They appeared without warning, their stealth systems having hidden them from every sensor in the system. One moment, there was empty space. The next moment, there was war. Captain Chris Dalton commanded the lead ship, the Defiant. He was 43 years old and had spent half his life preparing for this moment. His crew had trained in secret for years, running simulations of this exact attack hundreds of times. Now, as the Kelthari defense grid scrambled to respond, he gave the order to fire. Human weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They did not use conventional explosives or plasma charges. Instead, they fired concentrated beams of energy that cut through shields like water through paper. The first defense platform died in seconds, its generators overloading and its hull splitting open. The second followed moments later. The Kelthari responded as quickly as they could. Their warships rushed toward the human fleet, firing everything they had. But their weapons could not lock onto targets they could barely see. Their shields could not stop attacks they did not understand. One by one, their ships began to fall. Captain Dalton watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. He felt no joy in the destruction. He felt only the cold satisfaction of a job done well. In 11 minutes, every orbital defense platform was disabled. The Kelthari homeworld lay exposed, its military strength shattered in less time than it took to eat breakfast. But the humans did not attack the planet. Their orders were specific. Destroy military targets only. Leave civilians alone. This was not about revenge. This was about sending a message. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Commander Nicole Grant led a strike team onto the Sindari Bioweapons Research Station. Her soldiers wore powered armor that made them stronger and faster than any unaugmented being. They moved through the station's corridors with deadly efficiency, neutralizing guards and securing key locations. Nicole was a woman who did not waste words. She had grown up on Mars, in a mining colony where survival depended on quick action and clear thinking. When she reached the main laboratory, she found exactly what she was looking for. Rows of containers held samples of engineered diseases. Each one was labeled with the name of a target species. The plague on Arden IV was only one of dozens that the Sindari had created. There were diseases designed to kill Vorlani, to cripple Guthrani, to sterilize Nexari. The Sindari had been planning genocide on a galactic scale, and no one in the Council had done anything to stop them. Nicole secured the evidence and transmitted it to Human Command. Then she set charges throughout the facility. When her team was safely away, she triggered the explosives. The station disappeared in a flash of light, taking its cargo of death with it. On Nexus Prime, the heart of galactic civilization, a different kind of attack was underway. Ben Marshall walked calmly through the corridors of the Council station. He looked like any other human diplomat, dressed in formal clothes and carrying a briefcase. Security officers glanced at him and saw nothing unusual. Their scanners detected no weapons, no explosives, nothing that suggested a threat. The devices in his briefcase were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were transmitters, small and carefully shielded, designed to bypass every security system the Council had ever created. Ben had spent 3 years mapping the station's layout, identifying the locations of classified archives and secure communication nodes. Now, he put that knowledge to use. He planted the first device in a maintenance shaft near the Council chamber. The second went behind a decorative panel in the diplomatic quarter. The third was hidden in a ventilation system that ran through the intelligence section. One by one, 17 transmitters were placed throughout the station. When the last one was in position, Ben made his way to a small cafe on the station's public level. He ordered a cup of tea and waited. At exactly midnight, Earth Standard Time, he pressed a button on his communicator. The transmitters activated simultaneously. They did not explode. They did not release any kind of toxin. Instead, they began broadcasting. Every secret file in the Council's classified archives was suddenly available to anyone with a receiver. Financial records showing bribes paid to suppress emerging species, military plans for preemptive strikes against civilizations that might one day become threats, scientific research stolen from younger races and claimed as Council innovations, and evidence. Mountains of evidence showing how the Council had manipulated galactic politics for millennia. The files revealed that the Kelthari had engineered a famine on 7 worlds to maintain control of food supplies. The Vorlani had assassinated leaders of promising civilizations to prevent them from challenging Council authority. The Sindari bioweapons program was not a secret project but an official Council initiative, approved by the High Chancellor himself. Most devastating of all, the files showed that Earth had been marked for population reduction. The Council had decided that humans were becoming too numerous, too ambitious, too difficult to control. Within the next decade, a plague would have been released on human worlds. Billions would have died. Across the galaxy, people watched these revelations in horror. Citizens who had trusted their governments discovered that they had been lied to for generations. Species that had considered themselves allies realized they had been pawns in a game they did not understand. Riots began on 100 worlds as the truth spread. High Chancellor Vorath sat in his private chambers, watching his empire crumble. He had ruled the council for 200 years. He had believed his power was absolute, his secrets secure. Now everything was falling apart, and he did not understand how this had happened. The humans. The worthless, primitive humans. They had done this. Admiral Scott Brennan appeared on every screen in the galaxy. His face was calm, his voice steady. He spoke in simple words that needed no translation. He said they called us vermin. He said they laughed at our children dying. He said they thought us weak because we asked for peace. He paused, and his eyes seemed to harden. He said they were never weak. They were patient. And now, the galaxy would learn what humanity did to those who harmed their people. On Arden IV, Dr. Amy Patterson watched the broadcast with tears streaming down her face. Around her, colonists, who had been preparing to die now, stared at their screens in disbelief. The galaxy was finally learning the truth. The galaxy was finally seeing what the Council really was. And humanity was no longer kneeling. The night continued, and the attacks continued with it. Human ships appeared in system after system, striking military targets and vanishing before any defense could be mounted. Communications networks collapsed under the flood of leaked data. Political alliances that had stood for centuries shattered as species learned how they had been betrayed. By dawn, Earth Standard Time, the Galactic Concord was dying. Its military power was broken. Its secrets were exposed. Its reputation was destroyed. And humanity was just getting started. The galaxy burned, but it was a controlled burn. Admiral Scott Brennan had given strict orders to every ship in the fleet. Military targets only. No civilian casualties. No unnecessary destruction. This was not about vengeance. This was about breaking the power of those who had kept humanity and countless other species in chains. Some of his officers had questioned this approach. The Council species had shown no mercy to humans. They had laughed at dying children. They had planned genocide. Why should they receive better treatment than they had given? Brennan's answer was simple. Humanity would not become the thing it was fighting against. They would be better. They would be fair. And when the war was over, they would be able to look at themselves in the mirror without shame. On the Vorlani homeworld, the Grand Fleet gathered for a final stand. 212 warships assembled in formation, their commanders determined to stop the human advance. The Vorlani were proud warriors who had not lost a major battle in 800 years. Admiral Brennan contacted their commander directly. He offered terms of surrender. The Vorlani could stand down their fleet, accept temporary disarmament, and join negotiations for a new galactic order. No one else needed to die. The Vorlani commander laughed, just as the Council had laughed at Katie Morgan. He said humans were insects, and insects would be crushed. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Human ships moved through the Vorlani formation like ghosts. Their weapons struck from angles that should have been impossible. Their defenses absorbed everything the Vorlani could throw at them. One by one, the proud warships of the Vorlani fleet were disabled or destroyed. When it was over, 212 Vorlani ships lay broken in space. The humans had lost 3. The Vorlani commander survived. His ship was crippled but not destroyed, and human marines boarded to take him prisoner. As they led him away, he stared at his captors with eyes full of disbelief. How had this happened? How had the primitives become so powerful? No one answered him. No one needed to. On Nexus Prime, Katie Morgan walked through the doors of the council chamber for the second time. But everything was different now. The first time she had come here, she had been a supplicant, begging for scraps of mercy from those who had none to give. Now she walked with armed marines at her side, her head held high, her eyes clear and cold. The chamber was nearly empty. Many delegates had fled when the first reports came in. Others had been arrested by their own people. As the leaked files exposed their crimes, only a handful remained, sitting in their floating platforms and watching the human ambassador approach. High Chancellor Vorath was among them. He had nowhere to run. His own species had turned against him when they learned the truth about his leadership. Now he sat alone, stripped of his authority, waiting to learn his fate. Katie stood in the center of the chamber and looked up at the aliens who had once mocked her. None of them were laughing now. She began to speak, her voice carrying through the silent room. She presented evidence of every crime the Council had committed: the engineered plagues, the suppressed technologies, the assassinations and manipulations and lies. Each accusation was supported by documents from the Council's own archives. She spoke about the people of Arden IV, the colonists who had died while the Council refused to help. She spoke about the billions of lives that would have been lost if the planned human population reduction had gone forward. She spoke about the countless species that had been crushed beneath the Council's heel over thousands of years. When she finished, the silence stretched on and on. The remaining delegates did not try to defend themselves. They could not. The evidence was too clear, too complete. Everything they had done was now known to the entire galaxy. High Chancellor Vorath tried to speak. His voice was thin and weak, nothing like the commanding tone he had used when denying Katie's request for aid. He said there were reasons for what the Council had done. He said they had maintained peace and stability for millennia. He said the lesser species were not ready for the responsibilities of true power. Katie cut him off. Her voice was sharp as a blade. She said they had 60 years to treat humans as equals. They chose contempt. They chose cruelty. Now they would face justice. The word justice hung in the air. Vorath seemed to shrink in his seat. He had ruled the galaxy for 2 centuries. Now, he was nothing more than a criminal awaiting trial. Human ships continued their work across known space, but now they were not alone. On a dozen worlds, species that had suffered under Council rule rose up to join the fight. The Gathrani, who had been denied basic medical technology for centuries. The Nexari, whose home planet had been stripped of resources. The Telosi, who had watched their culture suppressed and their history erased. These species did not have the weapons or ships that humans possessed, but they had numbers, and they had rage. Council outposts that had stood for generations fell to crowds of angry citizens. Governments that had collaborated with the Council were overthrown. Statues of Kelthari leaders were torn down and melted. Admiral Brennan watched these developments with careful attention. He sent orders to his captains to protect civilian populations wherever possible. Even civilian populations of species that had been enemies. Revolution was necessary, but chaos served no one. On Arden IV, human medical ships finally arrived. Dr. Amy Patterson stood on the landing field as the first vessel touched down. She had not slept in days. Her hands were shaking. Half the colonists she had tried to save were dead, and the other half were barely hanging on. The ship's doors opened, and medical teams rushed out carrying equipment that Amy had only seen in textbooks. They brought medicines that could target the plague at the genetic level. They brought machines that could repair damaged tissue in minutes. They brought hope. Amy led them to the hospital, walking as fast as her exhausted legs could carry her. The young boy Marcus was still alive, though barely. His mother had not left his side since the sickness took hold. A human doctor named Sam Rivera examined the boy and nodded to Amy. The medicine would work. Marcus would survive. Amy stepped outside and let herself cry for the first time in weeks. The stars above her seemed brighter than they had before. The nightmare was ending. Secretary General Derek Palmer broadcast a message to every inhabited world in the galaxy. He announced the formation of a new alliance called the Coalition of Free Worlds. Any species that wished to join would be welcomed as equals. There would be no tiers of membership. There would be no restricted technology. There would be no masters and servants. Any species that continued the Council's policies, he warned, would be treated as enemies of sentient life. Within 72 hours, 18 species had applied to join the coalition. The galactic concord was fracturing. Its members were abandoning it as fast as they could, desperate to distance themselves from the crimes that had been revealed. On Nexus Prime, human engineers began dismantling the Council's communications infrastructure. The old networks that had controlled the flow of information for millennia would be replaced with open systems that anyone could access. Secrets would be harder to keep. Lies would be harder to maintain. Katie Morgan stood at a window overlooking the station's central plaza. Below her, she could see beings of 100 different species moving through the crowds. Some looked lost and confused. Some looked angry. Some looked hopeful. Lieutenant Ryan Cole joined her at the window. He had been promoted twice in the past week and now served as her chief of staff. He asked her how she felt. Katie thought about the question for a long time before answering. She said she felt tired. She felt sad for all the lives that had been lost. She felt proud of what humanity had accomplished. But mostly, she felt ready. Ready to build something new. Ready to create a galaxy where what happened to Arden IV would never happen again. Ready to prove that the power humans had taken would be used for good. Ryan nodded. He felt the same way. Together, they watched the plaza below and thought about the future. 3 months had passed since the Night of Broken Chains, and the galaxy was a different place. The Galactic Concord still existed, but only in name. Most of its member species had abandoned it, fleeing to the coalition of free worlds or declaring independence. The once mighty alliance that had controlled the galaxy for millennia was now a hollow shell, a reminder of what happened when power was used for cruelty instead of justice. High Chancellor Vorath sat in a holding cell on Nexus Prime, awaiting trial for crimes against sentient life. He had lost weight since his arrest. His once commanding presence had faded into something small and broken. The alien who had laughed at dying human children now spent his days staring at the walls of his cell, waiting for a judgment he could not escape. The trial would be broadcast to every inhabited world. Representatives from over 60 species would testify about the suffering the Council had caused. It would take months, perhaps years, to document all the crimes, but justice would be served. That much was certain. On Earth, Secretary General Derek Palmer addressed the people in a global broadcast. He stood in front of the United Earth Assembly, surrounded by representatives from every human nation and colony. His voice was calm but carried the weight of everything that had happened. He acknowledged that humanity had broken laws. They had violated treaties. They had used violence. He did not try to hide these facts or make excuses for them, but he also did not apologize. Derek explained that sometimes the rules were designed to keep the oppressed in chains. Sometimes breaking those rules was the only path to freedom. Humanity had faced a choice between obedience and survival, and they had chosen to survive. The audience was silent as he spoke. Many of them had lost friends or family members in the war. Others had fought in the battles themselves. All of them understood what was at stake. Derek spoke about the future. The coalition of free worlds was growing every day. Species that had been enemies were learning to work together. Technology that had been hoarded by the Council was being shared freely. Medical advances were saving lives on worlds that had never had access to them before. But the work was not finished. Building a fair galaxy would take generations. There would be setbacks and challenges. Not everyone would support the new order. Some would try to restore the old ways, and they would have to be stopped. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. Now they had to prove they deserved to keep it. Admiral Scott Brennan retired from active command 1 week after Derek's speech. He was 62 years old and had spent most of his life preparing for a war that lasted only days. Now that the fighting was over, he wanted to rest. But rest did not come easily to men like Brennan. He found himself restless in his apartment on Earth, unable to settle into civilian life. After a few weeks, he accepted a position at the new Coalition Military Academy, where he would train the next generation of officers. His students came from a dozen different species. Young Vorlani and Guthrani and Nexari sat beside young humans, learning the same lessons and following the same code. Brennan taught them about strategy and tactics, but he also taught them about honor. He told them that power without restraint was dangerous, that victory without justice was hollow. Some of his students would become great leaders. Others would make mistakes. All of them would carry what they learned into the future. Katie Morgan became the first human to serve as Speaker of the Coalition Assembly. It was a position of immense responsibility, requiring her to balance the interests of dozens of species while guiding the new alliance toward stability. Her opening address was broadcast to every coalition world. She stood at a podium in the new assembly chamber, looking out at representatives from species that had been enemies only months before. She spoke about the night she had stood before the council and begged for help. She spoke about the laughter that had followed her plea. She spoke about the anger and humiliation she had felt, and how close she had come to despair. But then she spoke about hope. She said that humanity had not risen up out of hatred. They had risen because they believed in something better. They believed that all sentient beings deserved dignity. They believed that strength should protect the weak, not exploit them. She told the assembly that the coalition would not rule as the council had ruled. They would not mock the desperate or exploit the powerless. But they would never again allow anyone to laugh at suffering. They would never again stand by while innocents died. Power is not given, she said. It is taken by those brave enough to reach for it. We reached, and now we hold the future in our hands. We will use that power wisely. The assembly erupted in applause. Even species that had once been rivals now cheered together. Something new was being born. Something that might actually last. On Arden IV, the colony was thriving. Dr. Amy Patterson had stayed after the crisis ended, helping to rebuild what the plague had destroyed. The medical center she established had become a hub for research, staffed by scientists from a dozen worlds working together to develop treatments that would be shared freely with anyone who needed them. The children who had nearly died were now healthy and strong. Marcus, the young boy who had been hours from death, played in fields of alien flowers with other survivors. He did not fully understand what had happened or how close he had come to dying. He only knew that bad times had passed and good times had come. His mother watched him play with tears in her eyes. She had lost so much during the plague. Her husband, her daughter, friends, and neighbors who would never return. But her son was alive. The future was bright. That was enough. Lieutenant Ryan Cole, now promoted to captain, commanded a patrol vessel on the frontier of known space. His mission was to make contact with species that had not yet encountered galactic civilization and to offer them friendship rather than exploitation. One day, his sensors detected a small ship drifting near an unexplored system. The vessel was crude by coalition standards, barely capable of interstellar travel. Its design was unfamiliar. This was a species that had never been contacted before. Ryan opened a channel and waited. After a long moment, a face appeared on his screen. The being was roughly humanoid, with large eyes and skin that shifted colors as it expressed emotion. It looked frightened and confused. Ryan thought about how humanity had felt when they first met alien life. He thought about how the council had treated them, the contempt and mockery and cruelty. He thought about the 60 years of humiliation that had followed. He would not let this new species experience the same thing. He spoke in a calm, gentle voice. He said not to be afraid. He said they were humans, and they were here to help. The alien's skin shifted to a lighter color, and Ryan somehow knew that meant the fear was fading. Questions followed. Hesitant and nervous, Ryan answered them patiently, explaining who he was and where he came from. He did not demand obedience. He did not assert superiority. He simply offered friendship to beings who had no reason to trust him. By the time the conversation ended, the alien was smiling. At least, Ryan thought it was a smile. Cultural differences made such things hard to interpret, but the fear was gone, replaced by something that looked like wonder. The small ship turned and headed back toward its home planet. Ryan knew that it would return, with stories of the strange beings from the stars, who had spoken kindly and offered peace. He hoped those stories would be the beginning of something good. His first officer, a young woman named Lisa Chang, joined him on the bridge. She asked him what he was thinking about. Ryan looked out at the stars and took a long time to answer. He said he was thinking about how far humanity had come. A few centuries ago, they had not even known other intelligent life existed. Now they were helping to build a galactic civilization based on fairness and respect. He said he was also thinking about the Council and everything they had done wrong. They had possessed incredible power and used it to harm others. They had possessed incredible knowledge and used it to keep others ignorant. They had possessed incredible opportunity and wasted it on cruelty and greed. Humanity would not make the same mistakes. They could not afford to. The galaxy was watching them, waiting to see if the species that had shattered every treaty would honor its promises. Ryan intended to make sure those promises were kept. In the end, the Council had learned a simple truth that they should have understood from the beginning. Some species could be pushed and mocked and belittled for generations. They could be forced to kneel and beg and suffer. They could be treated as less than nothing by those who believed themselves superior. But when those species finally rose up, their anger could reshape the stars themselves. Humanity had risen. The stars had been reshaped, and a new dawn was breaking across the galaxy. It would not be easy. The wounds of the past would take time to heal. Old hatreds would linger. New challenges would emerge. But for the first time in galactic history, there was reason to hope that things could be different. The coalition of free worlds was proof of that hope. It was proof that sentient beings could choose cooperation over exploitation, justice over cruelty, compassion over contempt. It was proof that the future could be better than the past. And somewhere on a small ship at the edge of known space, a human captain smiled as he guided his vessel toward new horizons, carrying with him the promise of a galaxy reborn.